Hi everybody. Today's lesson's on the gymnosperms. So far this unit, we talked about the evolution of moss and we talked about the evolution of ferns. But for the first time in gymnosperms, we see a few important characteristics evolve for the very first time. For example, gymnosperms were the first plants to evolve wood that allowed them to grow taller than any other plant. Growing tall has some advantages. If you're a plant, growing tall allows you to collect more sunlight. But these gymnosperms also evolved at the height of the dinosaurs. So growing tall was also an adaptation to prevent dinosaurs from eating you. The point was to grow taller than the dinosaurs could reach. So the tallest trees today, like the giant redwood trees in California, evolved to kind of produce leaves that were out of reach of these giant dinosaurs that survived at the time. Gymnosperms can also survive in drier environments than both mosses and ferns. Remember that moss and ferns always need to be near water so the sperm cells can swim to the egg cell, but no longer do we need the sperm cells to swim to the egg cells in gymnosperms. We're going to have another method that they use to get their sperm cells to travel. Finally, a lot of the gymnosperms are plants that we're familiar with, like pine trees and fir trees and spruce trees, things like that. They're all conifers that have needle-like leaves. These needle-like leaves are an adaptation to conserve water. And that needle shape gives the leaves a smaller surface area to volume ratio so that less water gets evaporated through the surface of a leaf in the process known as transpiration. If we talk a little bit about the reproduction of the gymnosperms, the male gametophyte, right, the stage that produces sperm cells and egg cells, is basically confined in cones. Right? So we have cones that produce pollen grains that we see right here. And those pollen grains contain sperm cells. Those pollen grains spread the sperm by being carried on the wind. Now, gymnosperms must produce lots of pollen, a lot more pollen than other types of plants. And that's because you can't always trust the wind to carry these pollen grains exactly where you want them to go, which is to, like, a female cone on a different gymnosperm. So you produce so much pollen because a lot of it's going to be wasted because the wind blows it in the wrong direction and it lands on your cars, it lands on the grounds. It's not carried where you want it to go because you can't trust the wind. However, a few of these pollen grains will find their way to a female cone that looks like this. The scales of this female cone contain the egg cell, right? So the pollen grain lands on that cone, and eventually the sperm travels through a tube, fertilizes the egg cell, and produces a seed that looks like this. Again, just like with the pollen grains, we see wings on the seed. And that's because the seeds are also dispersed away from the parent plant via wind. So gymnosperms are completely reliant on wind for reproduction rather than water. The last thing I want to talk about today is the differences between seeds and spores. Because mosses and ferns both rely on spores for reproduction, whereas gymnosperms mark the beginning of a transition for plants where we're no longer relying on spores, we're instead relying on seeds. Right? So some characteristics of spores, that spores are always very small. Right? They're usually just a single cell. They don't provide any protection or food for that young plant. However, being super small does mean that you're easily transported by wind. So the dispersal of spores, like spreading away from the parent plant to minimize competition, is not a problem. Spores are also haploid, so they always give rise to the gametophyte generation, and they take very little energy to produce, so you can produce spores by the millions or billions. On the other side, we have seeds. Seeds can vary in size. Some orchids can produce seeds that are microscopic, and then palm trees produce seeds the size of coconuts. The reason why seeds are larger than spores is because inside that seed we have the endosperm, which provides food for the embryo, and we have the seed coat, which provides protection for that embryo. However, this large size means that seeds are difficult to transport. A lot of times they have to design ways where they can float on water, be carried by the wind, or be transported by animals. Seeds are diploid, so they're part of the sporophyte generation, and they take much more energy produced than spores. So we make relatively few seeds compared to the number of spores that are created. Alright guys, that's it for today's lesson. Thank you.